when I was an early teenager, and I spent a lot of time out in the woods behind my house. And after a few years of doing that, my mom started getting into Buddhism, asked me if I wanted to do a class for teenagers, a meditation class in Seattle. And it was just kind of perfect for me. I was like, yeah, I want to do that. Gathered up my friends, whoever would come, sat down, did a first 10-minute meditation. And I was like, oh, this is just like being a tree. This is kind of what I was observing out in the forest. And my teacher, Rodney Smith, who's still my teacher, he practiced in Thailand in the forest, the jungles there, and nature was a big inspiration for him. So he was like, yeah, that makes sense to him. And I kept practicing with him for decades after that. That kind of just lit a fire. It was just something intuitive. I was like, I'm going to be doing this the rest of my life. And I think part of it was there's a huge juxtaposition between my life in high school about mattered so much how I appeared and what I said and how I acted versus just sitting in silence, being like a tree. It just felt really refreshing. And I guess the themes of that are really like authenticity, vulnerability. Those just resonated with my heart at that time. My teacher was Buddhist, and I ended up learning a lot of Buddhist teachings, ended up living at retreat centers for many years. After that, I learned there's a lot of profound wisdom teachings in that tradition. And by that tradition, I mean Theravada Buddhism, which is usually called insight meditation in the West, or Vipassana. And there's a number of teachings associated with that. So my practice deepened in a lot of ways, but it always kind of held that root inspiration of nature as sort of being my first teacher. And yeah, I always thought, after college, I would get a job, maybe in some environmental field, because I cared a lot about that. But this meditation draw just really kept pulling on me. So like I said, living at different retreat centers, eventually found my way to a Zen center in California that I felt like really spoke to me. It's called San Francisco Zen Center, Green Gulch Farm. And I was doing farming, meditating, living in community. And say it was like about that time, a little bit before then, that I had a number of wonderful, meaningful spiritual experiences, mostly through just breath meditation, watching my breath or feeling the breath in my body and being out in nature. But yeah, a number of deeper emotional experiences started arising for me that I didn't really understand. And mostly they were like tension in the body, like just really thick pockets of tension that would create a lot of agitation. Sometimes deeper like fear, terror experiences that would come up. And teachings and the teachers I had at that point, I was like interacting with a lot of different teachers and didn't really have a clear method. I mean, I would practice mindfulness with it. I would allow it to be the best I could. But it became sort of obsessive, like trying to figure out how to resolve the discomfort. And, it kind of came and went for, I'd say, like a solid 5 years. And I kind of just kept going the way I was going and doing longer retreats. And I think part of what was happening for me is the sort of the Theravada path of going deeper into solo, silent retreat was interesting, but it also didn't really respect the side of me that was really creative and passionate. And so I ended up following my passion, I'll say, by following farming, permaculture, eventually created a native plant nursery, which I own today. So I lived in Oregon, where I still live now, an intentional community, and got into nonprofit management and education of youth and starting this plant nursery and getting into the gardens and all this stuff. Just kind of, and I would still practice, but I was determined to try to merge my spiritual insights I had with my everyday life. I guess I just felt like there was so much that the world needed. I wanted to do something, but I wanted to find something that really fed me and fed the world at the same time. So I was exploring in my 20s, figuring out what really resonated. But the gardening, the farming, the permaculture was just such an amazing support to the meditation practice. And growing my own food and growing food for others was just such a deep reminder of the insights I had that were a little more intellectual really at that point in my body, that you are everything, you are nature. But growing it, eating the food that you grow and feeling the nourishment, like that's just one of many ways that you kind of get reminded, like, oh yeah, okay. And get the earth deeper in your body, grounded. Because I had so many bigger spiritual experiences early on that were just, especially when I was out in Hawaii, it's just kind of ungrounding, just overwhelming in a certain way. So getting the earth back in me. So that combination of, being in the earth and gardening and farming and being of service, it all just really was working for me, I would say. But I think it took a intimate relationship that was really sort of challenging, dysfunctional, that ended up dissolving to really bring me into the next phase of my practice. That somatic tension and those emotions I mentioned earlier, I was just so triggered in this relationship. And so it was that, as well as being on a certain month-long retreat that was very challenging for me. And a teacher there had said, why don't you try somatic therapy? And I hadn't really looked outside of Buddhism at that point for much. I mean, I'd read other religious traditions, spiritual traditions, but not therapy and not emotional work. So I begrudgingly eventually made my way there. I really kind of at first thought it was a bit of a failure of the practice, of the meditation practice, to have to go to therapy, but ended up finding a Zen teacher who was an internal family systems therapist and worked with her for about 10 years. And that just opened things up in a whole new way. So all this somatic tension that I was just practicing mindfulness with, and it's coming, it's going, it's changing sensation. It's not me, it's not mine. It's just here. That whole paradigm just kind of got flipped on its head, where all this somatic tension had a whole life to it, had a whole personal story, right? It was childhood trauma. It was birth trauma. It was all these different times throughout my life that parts of me were just still lodged in my body, holding these stories and holding these perspectives and having these needs. And my job then became to learn how to be very deeply self-compassionate to all of these parts of myself, which was a stretch at first, a big stretch. And it was all strange, but eventually it became sort of natural. And so I learned a lot during that phase, which I can go into as well. But mainly, I guess I could say about how everything within me, which I was sort of subtly perceiving as like hindrances, or there's sort of delusions, or these different words that are sometimes used in the Buddhist tradition. Everything in me was actually trying to help me. And we could expand that further. Sort of everything in the universe is sort of conspiring to try to help us awaken. So if I could change my perspective on that, and I could treat my emotions, these parts of myself, with gratitude and with deep compassion, things started to shift and flip. And I was able to integrate some of the deeper insights earlier in my journey, integrate and sustain, stabilize, I guess I'd say. And I guess that all kind of culminated with sort of a bigger spiritual experience, maybe when I was 35, which was, I could just say, sort of a union of the spiritual dimension of myself and the personal, or the mundane dimension of myself, in a profound and prolonged way. And it just, a lot of things clicked. And so that's how I came to write the book that I sent to you, sort of the unity of emotional healing and personal work, personal growth work, and spiritual insight, and how both need each other. Healing and spirituality need each other, and that when we put them together in a complete whole, that there's a lot of magic that can happen. So yeah, that's sort of one version of the story to how I came to almost to here, but it's always unfolding. So
I can relate to so much we were talking about. I'm going to go back to the beginning, ask you some questions all along the way, just because I'm curious for myself and I think others may benefit. So I didn't really start doing what you started doing as a teenager, really till after college. I was interested and I was questioning and things, but I didn't consciously do that until after college. But I remember in high school, like you were referring to that, and I'm sure in college too, there was such a thing of how we presented ourselves to the outside to try to get a certain validation to make our insides feel okay. And when you were referring to some of that for you, I was curious because I played sports and I was part of that kind of crowd and I did well in school. So it's kind of like a certain expectation that I had, or I thought others had of me. And so, but other people can have a completely different so-called group that they were part of that they felt that pressure from. So I was curious for you, when you were in high school or college, whatever it was, and you're feeling this pressure, was it to be something that was just more about how you're presenting yourself and it didn't feel like it was who you really were? Like, because you mentioned that difference for you.
yeah, I mean, there was just a lot of stress with trying to fit in. Like, I think I got bullied pretty well in elementary school, and that sort of like lit this fire in me where I was like, I'm going to fit in. Like, I'm going to learn how to like be cool. Because I was really hurt. I was a real sensitive kid. I mean, I guess we all are, but I was the sort of quiet, sensitive type. Like, I wasn't the bully type. And I got hurt, you know. So then I made a point of it. And I did all right, you know. Like, I found some friends and learned how to kind of play the games like you do in middle school and high school to whatever degree. But it was stressful, so it was a relief just to be given the permission just to be.
Yeah, I love that because I don't know if this is true, but I've worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of people through the years. And I don't know if I've ever met someone that didn't feel some kind of pressure to be something other than just be their deepest authentic essence, and
Yeah,
that they felt connected to that and were living from that. I think we all feel, yeah, there's, as you know, there's so many different interpretations, spiritual, psychological, survival, all these different
sure.
reasons. But really, if we're looking at how do we integrate all of it, which you've been talking a lot about, and the different phases of your trainings and
Hmm.
experiences. And I can relate so much to that. And really, for me personally, and a lot of my guests have not had this. They were just in a family that was super spiritual from the get go. But for me, it was really, really unconsciously, I wasn't aware I was doing this, trying so hard to make the outside work so I can get what I want on the inside. And it never worked. And it was out of hearing that there's another way and that soul pain of looking for something that things start opening up. And
Hmm.
so for me, that was like this whole other way of seeing life. And then once the concept was introduced of, well, there's another way of living, and I was determined I was going to live like that, then the next question is, well, how do you actually allow that to be your experience? And there's so
Yeah.
much unwinding of thoughts and stories and emotions. And like you were talking about relationships, I've had so many of those kind of relationships and so many things that seem to be fighting us being in our soul. But like you mentioned, really, when we look at it with love and awareness, we see it's all showing us things where we can become freer and deeper in our love and integration as opposed to a problem. And I think in spirituality, which I'm sure you've heard 1,000 times, like just drop your ego, drop your mind and all that.
Yeah.
And really, to me, the essence really in a deeper way, I think, is from a love and awareness. How do you look at this and embrace this and use it to become more integrated with your body, mind, spirit, love, all of it, and truthful, not just words, right?
Right. Certainly. And it's a tall order in this day and age, as anyone knows who've really tried to do it, because there are a lot of forces that are not super supportive of love and awareness. Being
Right
super
on.
busy, having to survival, pay the bills, having to whatever, be surrounded by folks that maybe don't have that priority at all, right? So it can be a lonely and tough journey sometimes. And you really have to put your nose to the grindstone and be like, yeah, I'm going to integrate this into my life. I have to have discipline. I'm sure that's a big part of your practice. And so, yes, we need to integrate it. And like, I also want to have a lot of compassion for folks who are just bypassing it. Cause like, I get it.
Yeah.
It's tough. And if there was a shortcut, I'd take it too. But we have bodies, we have nervous systems, and we got to include those if we're going to have any sort of sustainable revelation or sustainable transformation.
Yeah, and the way I feel and experience and often share with others through my work is if I'm just speaking from my current perspective of all of it, somehow having this higher out of your head, bigger picture awareness, trying to keep that in scope of remembering we're on in this miracle and we're only here for a short time and trying to have that perspective while you're fully present and appropriately engaged with what you're doing in the moment, and then
Yeah.
having your heart so open where the state of love is stronger than the fear of being emotionally hurt, and it's able to take care of our own hurt as well as love others, and then be so rooted in our body into the earth, whether
Yeah.
like you and many people I talk to is through nature. For me, a lot of it's been through different movement and somehow having practices for all of these that feel authentic for each of
Hmm.
us for today. So, with all
Yeah.
you've been through and all the training and all the teaching and writing and everything, if right now, if you were to share conceptually and practice wise the most important things that you feel, I know not one thing is right for everybody, but if you were to try to say, hey, all said and done, these are the concepts and practices that I feel could really help people in their simplicity and power.
Yeah. My own practice, like you said, I have like lots of different things to draw from. So I can be creative in different moments, I'll call it. But how I teach two main threads, which one is nature and meditation, or nature and Dharma. And in that context, nature's the teacher. And we're just opening and listening and receiving in the context of nature. And the transmission that comes from old growth trees and meadows and mountains is way deeper than what I can speak out of my mouth. And so when I'm leading retreats, it's all of us are just listening to that
Mm.
ancient wisdom that's coming through. And the core of that is that we're all connected, and there's a vast unknowable mystery here, and it's all unfolding just as it needs to be. And the most of the beings of nature emanate that amazingly. And so that's one thread, is like the nature and Dharma piece. And so if there's an instruction there, it's like, go to some place in nature that inspires you and just listen.
Mm.
And you don't need a whole lot of technique. It's good to be able to stay in your body. So like your breath is a good anchor, or wherever you're sitting on the ground, that point of contact. So good to have some place to come back to as an anchor, but also just like, yeah, you can have your eyes open, your ears open, and just hearing, seeing, being. So that's one thread, which I could go into more. But then the other is which is more what the Dharma healing book is about, is the self-compassion approach. It's the sort of necessity to do emotional healing work in order to integrate or even sometimes even to have a deeper spiritual experience. And that thread is all about sort of the growth of our capacity to sincerely offer ourselves care. It's learning to really feel that in your body, that emotion of compassion towards yourself, towards all parts of yourself, towards your discomfort, towards your wounds, and to grow that so it becomes unconditional. It's the I'm here for you no matter what kind of energy. And to learn how to embrace ourselves so fully in that way that inner transformation starts to happen on its own, emotional healing in particular, that the things we thought were in our way, the challenging thoughts and challenging emotions that we thought were in our way are actually our helpers. And if we honor them and devote ourselves to them, then they teach us and they transform and help us transform. So it's this deep self-compassion, but then that translates into a impersonal compassion, a collective compassion, a universal compassion. In other words, feeling nature, the universe, God, spirit, caring for us in the same way that we are caring for ourselves. And then finding the meeting place there where it's like, I'm deeply in love with myself. Source is deeply in love with me, and living in that at the convergence of those two rivers. So that's a series of self-compassion phrases and practices. So, I mean, being kind to yourself is the entry point. And a lot of us tolerate ourselves or okay with ourselves, or I don't really hate myself. I don't really need to do that. But we don't necessarily realize how averse we are to our own different parts of ourselves or pain that we carry. And so that's a natural instinct and it's fine. But I think we have to work pretty hard often to offset that and to
Mm-hmm.
really start to roll the ball of transformation of inner emotional healing and then eventually spiritual insight. So I don't know if that was quite concise in terms of a
No,
practice, but
definitely.
that's the general.
No, definitely. And if you're okay, I'll ask you a few questions about
Yeah.
both. I'll start with the one you just went into since that was the last one. So,
Yeah.
in my experience of really almost anything that I found true transformation, it was somehow where the thing that I was looking at was bigger than how I was looking at it before. And I'll give you an example. So, when I started feeling a lot of love for God, for love, for universe, and it just became stronger and stronger. All of a sudden, the idea that I'm separate from loving you was smaller than the experience of love. So that relationship of being like, wait a second, this love is so strong. Loving Justin or loving me is not different. And it kind of changed my relationship with battling myself. That was one way that was really helpful for me. And then on the flip side of that was looking at my issues when I kept asking myself, well, what's really behind this? What's beneath this? And then when I got to this place of, okay, as a human being, not feeling enough, feeling afraid, feeling emotionally vulnerable, all these things of being hurt, potentially being hurt, I said, oh, well, is there something that I believe and experience to be bigger and stronger than that? And it was love and awareness. So
Mm-hmm.
then from that place, at some point, for the most part, I stopped fighting myself because it comes up and I'm like, oh, that's just that part of me that can feel really afraid or not enough. And that's okay. That's part of being a human. But I love and take care of that. And so from the bigger thing, if you will, I was able to take care of these things in a way that felt really authentic instead of fighting myself of like, you shouldn't have that thought or you should love yourself or all these things.
Mm-hmm.
It became
Mm-hmm.
an entry into something larger that included me and included everyone, and there's no difference.
Yeah.
And like with parents, I do parenting work, and often parents or teachers I work with too, school teachers will tell me, I'm really good at loving my kids, but I don't love myself. And I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I always start with, I totally understand that battle.
Yeah.
And there's the love that you feel is bigger than both, and learning how to not separate yourself from it. I think in my mind, in my experience, it's a beautiful way of not fighting ourselves, but
Yeah.
entering something bigger to take care of this, to love like a mother or something that's loving its child in a beautiful way of just, I'm here with you to take care of you.
Yeah. 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 I like that. I like that.
I've spent time in nature, but not to the level that many of my guests have, and also people I know have, and become so in tune. And I get touched so deeply by that. And in some ways, I would like to take more time to do that. And I know what I'm doing just feels right. But when I have done it, and I'm out there meditating or just being, there's no question. You just naturally start sensing and feeling things because we're of the same making.
Mhm.
And also at times I would do things, for example, I would just put my attention in my ears and listen to a sound and breathe in and out to the sound, or look at a flower and have my awareness and my love and my breath connect us. So in some ways that seems a little more active than just being open to listen to nature. So I was curious, just
Sure.
some of your top ways you teach people or offer people to do that.
Yeah, I'm often combining some set of Buddhist teachings with being out in nature. So I'm walking people through some practices, most commonly the four foundations of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of bodily sensations, mindfulness of emotions, mindfulness of thoughts, and then mindfulness of awareness or emptiness. And so I do have some formula, but by the end of it, I guess that's what I was saying before, is like by the end of it, all kind of falls apart and you're just being there. But it does help to have some training wheels or some like a track to follow in order to then open up, because it's fine, go to nature and do whatever you want, and there's nourishment there, or do whatever you're inspired or drawn to. But it also helps to have built up a sort of a store of awareness, attention, by focusing over a period of time. And then that amplifies our capacity to be present with whatever we end up opening up to by the end of the retreat, for example. So I think it's good to have a ground and an anchor, and then from there kind of go. So one of the flows on the retreat, like, is we'll have a half an hour meditation together in the tent in the group, and then we'll do a walking meditation and go out. And I'll often offer some prompt where it's just, and maybe it is just connect with some part of nature. So maybe it's a flower, it's a tree, it's the sky, it's a river, whatever it is. There's some magic of taking that cultivated mindful energy and then moving out with it, and things are more vibrant and bright, and focus is easier to come by instead of being kind of like flitting around to this and that and the other thing. So really going deeper with some relationship out in nature, I guess you could call it. So that's a beautiful thing. The tradition I come from has particular articulations of what the deeper spiritual experience you're kind of moving towards is. So there is a whole story around that I could kind of go into, kind of context around that as well. But in the end, like, I really honor people's own journey just to find what they need to find.
I think it's really beautiful and truthful, because at one point, and I sometimes still fall for this, you think, oh, this is going to work for you, just do it. But the reality is we have no idea what's going to work for people. Even if we've seen 1,000 of the similar types of
Yeah.
people, 1,001 may be totally different of how they connect or process it or hear it. And so it's really that humility, and also you speaking about nature again as it's constantly giving. So for us is to open up and receive and to learn is so beautiful, because you don't have to generate it. It's already being generated.
Mhm.
I think that's a
Yeah.
really beautiful thing of true spirituality, and that it's a softening and an opening to feel the power inside, instead of trying to connect to the power by a doing of power. But
Yeah.
obviously you have to be present, like you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge that we, I think, live in today, is that just a number of things are uh, unnatural is really the best word, but it's just we spent the vast majority of human history living in much different contexts than we live right now. And most of us been raised in cultures that is pretty unhealthy in a number of ways. And so the healing work I'm talking about is a piece of coming back to psychological wholeness, I think, which is a state that I think was much more accessible in perhaps earlier times. And also coming back to nature. We used to obviously be much more connected to nature. And so in a way, the two threads I'm describing are bringing us back to a foundation of well-being. A lot of cultures, like the cultures that developed Buddhism, had a lot more of that foundation of well-being intact. And from that place, they ventured on various spiritual paths or techniques, etc. So I'm at least trying to bring people back to that foundational wellness, but it's not necessarily sort of the end of the exploration. It's sort of the beginning in a certain way. It's a huge thing just to get back to that foundation of well-being. And it does allow ourselves an authentic access to whatever spiritual dimension we resonate with, whatever we want to call it, God, spirit, whatever. And we still have to learn how to figure out, integrate that into modern life. And we've got to figure out if we want to take that further and sort of dive into deeper, more specialized sort of practices. And so there's kind of a lot to it, but just returning to wholeness, I think, is like, we just got to get back there at least. And then a lot takes its course
It's a
from there.
starting point, right? Like you can't be in the race if you haven't even walked up the racing line or whatever. So
Yeah.
one thing I like to do, and I sense you're similar to this in a way, is to be honorable and respectful to everything, and also to simplify and make relevant for myself and anyone I work with. And so I'm always constantly trying to get to the root of something as the concept and then the experiences. So if you were to simplify Buddhism as far as for people that pretend they didn't want to even hear the word, but they wanted to know the essence of the
Sure.
concepts and the practices, how would you lead somebody into that?
Yeah, I mean, the more you know about something, it's like the more you realize how vast the territory is. And so within Buddhism, there's so much. The tradition I was mostly trained in, I've been in various, but is Theravada Buddhism, and so it's the early teachings of the Buddha. And there are a few sort of hallmark teachings and ways of thinking about things. And I'll just mention one just to frame the basic context. It's called the Four Noble Truths. It's the first teaching of the Buddha after his awakening, and basically goes, first noble truth is there is suffering. Second, there's a cause of suffering. Third, there's an end to suffering. And fourth, there's a path to the end of suffering. So it's a lot of what the context of Buddhism is, that sort of moving to sort of liberation from suffering, and psychological suffering is what we're speaking to here in particular. And that kind of translates in a modern sense that life has always been challenging for people, and is perhaps even more so today. But there's universal characteristics. We get sick, we get old, we die, we lose everything we love, and go through all sorts of challenging experiences. That's not all, of course, but that's part of being human. There is suffering. The cause of it, or I say that second noble truth, is really that we make it worse. We make it worse by wanting what we don't have, not wanting what we do have, not knowing the preciousness of what we have. We make it worse by, it's often called desire, aversion, and delusion. And so really the aim of the practice is to stop making it worse and just to live in alignment with reality. And by alignment, I mean an acceptance of, embracing, which is sort of the third noble truth, that there's an end to suffering. It comes through seeing the clear nature, the true nature of reality. It's impermanent. It's deeply interconnected, and material things, experiences, circumstances can never lead to lasting fulfillment because they don't last. And if we see those things clearly, accept them, embrace them, then we can live both intimately engaged in the world while also being equanimous and non-attached. So it's kind of that sweet spot. To get there, there's like all sorts of different practices. And, breath meditation is one that I already mentioned, a core one. So yeah, that's like the general context. But I mean, Buddhism in general believes that, or tends to impart that we're essentially good. It was kind of what I was saying at one part of my story. It's like realizing that everything's rooting for us. We're essentially good. The universe is essentially good. And we don't so much need to become anything different than what we are. We need to sort of address some of the deep psychological habits that keep us in resistance the way things are, so that we can join in the mysterious celebration of life that is. Yeah, so that's a little bit about Buddhism.
That's great. So then going to something you just said about, and this is the way I feel it a lot of times, is just resting into who I am, fully integrated in the moment. It's such an interesting thing because there was all this seeking and running and trying and battling to end up just being right here in the moment, present in my heart, authentic,
Yeah.
where it just feels like the most natural thing ever. But it was so far away from my reality for so long. And it's just fascinating when you hear these things from some teachers different times, like, oh, you can awaken right now. And when you're not experiencing any of that, it just seems like, what do you mean? But then when you do have moments or whatever it is for anybody, when you just are resting into your soul, it just feels like the most natural thing there is. That anything
Yeah.
else seems like, why would I do that? But obviously there's a zillion reasons why we do and would. But from that place, it feels like putting on something that doesn't fit, that you're not interested in. So it is a fascinating thing. And I do think, like you spoke about, a lot of times it's just our internal story and belief and trauma and psychology and perception of things that keeps us separate from seeing what actually is. And so,
Hmm.
in the psychological healing trauma work you've done, what would be some main practices that you would share that you have found helpful for you or for others?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a fascinating thing how the human experience works. It's like, yeah, sometimes things are very clear and sometimes they're very muddy and sometimes it's somewhere in between. And so in a way, I think I see spiritual experience as just trying to include all of that. And it's almost like it's like a jewel that's with different bevels and it's like it's always turning and you're seeing different aspects of reality. It's like, oh, I'm now really stuck in my personal stuff. And oh, now it's like I'm one with the universe. Now
Yeah,
I'm in this
yeah.
relational dynamic, and now there's so many different angles and facets of life that we can see, and it's always evolving. But over our lives, I mean, if we keep practicing, then it's always deepening too. And so, in any event, with the trauma healing piece of it, our thoughts and emotions, in an ultimate sense, are just space. They're just stillness, silence, spaciousness. But when they hook into us, and when we get triggered, it's a very real thing and that we have to address and we have to be with. And, I think, I guess going back to that key view, we need to view everything in our heart and mind that is trying to help us. It may be somewhat dysfunctional in the moment. It's trying sometimes the key word, but it's trying to help us. But also more than that, we need to like offer it the perspective that it has wisdom. So it's trying to help us. It wants to work together. It wants to heal. It knows how to heal. So if we can orient to ourselves that way immediately and a trigger comes up, I mean, we have to be aware that we have to practice enough mindfulness to like know when there's an emotion in our body or know when there's a thought in our mind. But assuming we have that foundation, then we relate to it that way. Hey, friend, or hi, teacher, or welcome back, or it's good to see
Mm,
you again, or that's kind of the attitude. Or thank you for trying to help me. Like I'm really angry about something. Thank you for caring so much about that
mm.
thing. If I just immediately have that orientation, that's like all the wind out of the sails of that conditioning, even if it's really ancient. And so I think that's a really key piece. And that's what in Buddhism is called like the first step on that fourth noble truth is eightfold noble path. First step is wise view, and you want to, and then you're bringing that up too with having a bigger perspective on things. So you hold that wise view as the foundation. That's like the beginning of everything else. And when you have that wise view, it's a lot easier then to have a wise intention and wise action and wise meditation and so on. And with trauma healing, we're just leaning into that self-compassion as fully as we can and giving ourselves the space, giving the wounded parts of ourselves the space to do what they know how to do best, which is to heal. They just need the right container to do it in. And sometimes we have that perfect relationship, or we have the perfect parent, or we got the perfect setting in nature, or we have the perfect experience with God where it's like everything just flows and heals and it's like it's all good. But a lot of the time we need to put some personal effort into it and meet life halfway. And so we can learn to create that container for ourselves. So I think that's really the core of it.
When you were speaking about how you work with that, it made me think like how I told you how I was working with it. And there's a similar thing of trying to look at it from a perspective that seems healthier than being identified with the thing that's causing suffering. And somehow looking at it, like you're saying, with a container that is able to love or see it or understand the why of it or what's beneath it. And that I think naturally opens something to take care of it or to heal instead of fighting it. So I guess for people listening, if what Justin does or what I do, you're like, oh, I understand it, but I need a little different angle. The point is of developing a container in yourself that understands the underneath of all this and how you're able to see the wisdom or the love or what it was trying to do, like in dysfunctional relationships, which we both have shared, we've experienced before.
Yeah, yeah.
The goal is not to have a dysfunctional relationship. The goal is we're trying to feel love and loved and have a loving relationship. But in the confusion of the relating, triggering different things for both parties can create a real mess. But in that,
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking. And I know for me personally, that was when I shifted to start having healthy, mature relationships. Because even the ones before, the super dysfunctional ones, they were never like to me of two souls here to fully express and live and support each other. It was somehow trying to balance out both of our imbalances, it makes sense. But when you realize the dysfunction was just trying to feel safe and be loved and love, that
Yeah.
you don't hate it so much. You just see it for what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It helps understanding other people too. I mean, I kind of see the whole world that way, right? It's just people wanting love and connection, but they don't feel safe and connected in themselves. And so there's just a lot of outward expression of whatever it's malevolence or it's greed or it's confusion in one way or another. So yeah, it's understanding. It's just a lot of hurt people in the world that are just trying their best. But I see it all coming from love, really, but it's just gets distorted through our own confusion. I think if we do create a foundation of stability in ourselves, sometimes they call that sovereignty or sort of independence of well being. If we reclaim our sense of peace from the conditions and the people that we usually give it to, say, hey, I'm devoted to my own well being, creating a container, self compassionate container for myself. And we're just a lot less liable to create a lot of messes in relationships because a lot of that, in my experience at least, comes from hoping, wishing, needing someone else to meet emotional needs that they only have some, if any, capacity to do. But we do that with circumstances too. And we do that with jobs. We do it with all sorts of material things where it's like, maybe this particular thing will then finally make me whole. And of course, none of it does until we do the work to create psychological wholeness in ourselves. So if we're fractured, then we keep pulling parts of the world into our fractured universe and end up struggling a lot more. But ideally, you have two people who are kind of on the same page around that. And then you're in a relationship, and then you can communicate from a place where you don't feel threatened and learn that you can take risks of being vulnerable and intimate without having everything fall apart. For example, if this relationship ends, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's all going to be a total mess. But if you already have that stability of that self-compassionate container, a connection to something spiritual, then it's a lot less threatening to
Hmm.
say what you need to say, even if it means that the relationship's going to shift, or to follow your heart in a certain way, or to express a deep love that and vulnerability that you maybe never had before. So yeah, it just seems like it starts on the inside that to make the outside relationships really work.
Yeah, that's definitely my experience too, because I think, again, not being conscious of it, but just constantly having this game of ping pong in relationships, just like this, whatever the game is, and you think it's a certain way you agreed to play, and then they're trying to play harder or faster. You are, and you're like, wait a
Yeah.
second. And it's always this trying to get the game to be right instead of, hey, I'm going to show up in the way that I believe in. I'm going to show up no matter where and what I'm doing. This is who I am, and I don't want to betray that. And I
Yeah.
want to give you that same invitation. And maybe that does mean we don't stay together, whatever it is. And that's so scary, but it's
Hmm.
harder and scarier to cut off from ourselves. And I think that causes more pain than losing anyone
Yeah.
ultimately. So
Yeah. I agree.
another thing, another thing that I really sense with you and that I experience too, and it doesn't mean that somebody has to have this as their career necessarily, but it's to trust yourself of your unique expression of what you're going to do. I didn't know that I would be doing and teaching in all the different ways that I do today, but I listened to having to know what I found out to be like the purpose of life, the meaning of life, at least for me, and then sensing things that I was naturally drawn to somehow, movement and people and growing and learning, and like you with nature, and then bringing them together in a way that wasn't necessarily planned. It was the pieces started converging, like you spoke about. I think
Hmm.
maybe some people may not, for whatever reason, it may not be their career, but that doesn't mean they can't take different things together that they love and converge them into something that's uniquely their own expression. And I think giving ourselves all that freedom to create in the way that feels authentic for us is also very freeing in the expression of it. So it's not just all self contained.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully put. I think in some ways, following our authentic path, figuring out what our authentic path is and following it is one of the essential aspects of life, essential aspects of spiritual path, essential aspects of healing. Because if that's not lined up, it just doesn't seem like anything quite fully works out or quite fits. You never quite
Yeah.
fully get satisfied. And that's just a quandary a lot of us are in the modern age, is that we feel compelled or we feel forced for one reason or another to engage in jobs or activities that don't feed us. They don't light us
Yeah.
up. So I do feel privileged to sort of be able to be somewhat, I do multiple things for money, but I have a native plant nursery is like one of the things, but I also teach meditation. To be able to even do that part-time for me is a huge privilege because I just watch so many other folks like having to engage in jobs that don't feed them. That being said, I mean, sometimes it is an aspect of really taking the leap. There's a lot of conditions that can point us towards having to do certain things, but there's always choice. There's always options. And even if it's just carving out a little bit of time a day, like you're saying, doesn't necessarily have to be a job, but be able to feed those passions, the creativity. Meditation, if anything, is just like fed my creative spark. I love to create. I love to, was writing or creating the business or whatever it is. I always love having a creative project. I think it's just part of having a heart that's aligned with your authenticity. It's like, all right, what's next? Like, what do I get to explore next and what's going to come through? Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine a life without that. So reclaiming that, finding that, I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I'm thinking back for one point in my life where I was just really meditating a lot and I was still teaching, but it was just, I would show up and teach, but really it was just disconnect from life and just meditate on some level. And at some point, the feeling felt like I was trained to be like a racehorse or something, but I was getting locked up in the stable and I wasn't going
Mm,
out to express. And then at some
hmm.
point when I started creating more like you're talking about, it felt like, this is what was missing to be able to create whatever way, whether it's writing or videos or whatever it is. It
Mm,
feels so fulfilling to express it fully. And
yeah.
so at one point in my life, I wasn't doing that. And it did feel really like something was not right, but I didn't have somebody tell me like, hey, you have all this creative energy you should be expressing. It was just like, oh, drop your mind or whatever. Right. And so at some
Yeah.
point, I was like, wait a second, something is not right. And I need to follow this expression. And now more than ever, I am. And it feels so right that sometimes I'm like, okay, don't try to do too many things at once because then it takes away the cleanliness of the enjoyment and the purity of the expression. But it is
Nice. Yeah.
something that's so important, I think, that we all honor in our own unique way.
Yeah.
So if you were to like try to help people say, like, what's the purpose of life? That question or meaning of life. I know it's one of these questions that there's so many different answers, but in some ways, in my mind, it gets somewhat simple. But I'm just curious how you see that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of different potential answers and different layers to it. I think the most universal layer is that just by being who we are sort of expressing the will of the mystery, the universe. And so, in other words, I think most fundamentally, the universe is out to just know itself in all sorts of myriad forms across all space and time and eternity. And here we are as one of those expressions. And so that's a nice perspective of a wise view that also creates a container for practice because then it's just like, oh, I don't need to do a particular technique. I'm just marveling at me being a part of this vast mystery, or I'm marveling at the universe knowing itself through me in each moment. Wow. It's another fresh moment of this human experience. So that's nice because we don't actually have to like find a career. We don't have to find this or that. To do that, we just step outside or step wherever and have that reflection. And I think that is the most fundamental purpose
Mm.
of existence is to know and enjoy itself. But if we hone in a little more on the human experience, I might say that another purpose is this healing and spiritual insight or this what we call awakening in the Buddhist tradition, which is sort of a deeper version of what I just described, which is like really coming to know that you are the universe, you are spirit, you are that, and really coming to know the nature of this realm as being impermanent and being impersonal, interconnected, all these kind of fundamental facets. And I think that deepens the enjoyment, that deepens the sort of the joy of the universe and its unfolding, because finally a little piece of itself has devoted itself to knowing itself in such a thorough and loving way that like you just amplify it. Like when a human being realizes that it's actually the universe, there's a lot of
Mm.
love there. It's like, but it's
Mhm.
a universal love. So it's like, what, 13 billion years ago, whatever, there's a big bang out of nothing. All this came and like finally here we are. And the universe has created this love from nothing, this universal love. And so it's like, if we can cultivate that dimension of ourselves, those aspects of ourselves, it's like kind of just deepens the celebration. I think that's kind of the more spiritual purpose. But yeah, within both of those things I just said, like you could do any sort of career, you could do any sort of thing as long as it honors that authenticity. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, when you said that, I experienced something I've heard before in a way I've never have. I've always heard in the spiritual realm or different places anywhere, people are like, oh, there's only one of you, so be you fully. And I've never really taken that in, but when you were speaking, I experienced that as in, well, as far as we know, right? But in this unique way of Justin or
Yeah.
Jonathan, there isn't, well, whether there is or isn't doesn't matter. All we know is this one. But how do we allow this ultimate freedom of coming from our deepest place, spirit, essence, love, God, and embracing, healing, understanding the things that to our mind appear to interfere, but actually taking all of it and making it into this stew of who we authentically are and having the courage to fully express that so that we feel on that edge that we're so being authentic and that there's not regret for not expressing the gift we're being given, even in the
Mm-hmm.
hardness of stuff. And I've never experienced that in that way. When you said that, I was like, oh, that's this freedom of fully being us and not trying to be someone else.
Yeah. It's a gorgeous thing, you know, just being you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And to really know that and feel that and be like, wow, I don't know. It does seem to me like you're the only version of you that's ever been and ever will be. It's every little facet, every bit of creation is like somewhat different. It's this different angle on it. And so it's a beautiful thing to just cherish that you that you have, that energetic signature of like what it is to be Justin. And it's a real spiritual thing too. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm thankful, like I mentioned to you in the beginning when we first met each other today, that to have these heart to heart, soul to soul, brotherhood, sisterhood,
Yeah.
humanhood relatings, and for me, the most intimate thing in myself to open up and connect with someone else doing the same to them is so deeply fulfilling. And I feel so much with what we were just talking about that we're doing it as we're communicating. And to me, it's so
Hmm.
deeply fulfilling. And I cherish it. And I'm always thankful to meet people that I've never heard of or known, even if I have, but if I haven't, and to see and experience that person's result of the work they've done. And then to
Hmm.
also hear and see and feel what they're doing in the world with it. It's just so beautiful to see so many human beings that are so dedicated to love and healing so they can express love fully in themselves and also so engaged with other people to have that relationship of healthy love. And so I'm very
Yeah.
thankful and appreciative of what you're doing and the connection, the
Thank
time.
you.
And
I feel very honored to be able to be a part of these conversations and these practices and just being with people who are authentic and sincere doing their work. And that's that's how I want to live the rest of my life. So yeah, grateful to meet you too.
thank you for being part of the Spiritual Ninja podcast. I really appreciate you being here. My goal with the podcast is to share heart to heart, soul to soul conversations. So if you would be so kind to share and to follow, that helps me get the word out about the podcast. Okay. Thank you and hope to see you on another podcast soon.